what we stand for is helping people stay in stride and live their best life by being true to themselves as defined by their ID, because your ID is like your mental thumbprint, you know, how you're wired innately. And what we've found is that when you're true to the way that you're instinctively wired, that's when you perform best. And not knowing what the COVID journey would involve for people, I thought one of the best things we could do would be to just have a forum each week that we could bring people together, and through the support of the group, both, you know, the friendship, but also the sharing of insights around IDs, help people stay in stride. And this is webinar 45. We had a break over Christmas, something that we haven't missed. But the flow now is that once a month, I conduct what I call a game changer interview. And this is with somebody who, you know, we, not just myself, but our team have experienced as, you know, very authentic in the way that they are true to themselves and their ID. And as a result, are or have done something that's quite game changing. They don't need to be famous. They don't need to necessarily be, you know, renowned for what they've done, but in what they're doing, could they set a really good example with some of the stories and the insights that they have that can make a big difference for those of you who are, you know, all aspiring on a similar journey. And on that basis, I asked both a good friend of mine and a really valuable client and customer of ours, Cate Gutowski from AWS, if she wouldn't mind being my guest for this month. And, you know, Cate being Cate very willingly agreed. We always have a lot of fun in our interactions, and I'm sure today will be fun as well. But Cate is, just to give you a little bit of background while she comes online, Cate works with AWS, which is one of the major organizations under the Amazon umbrella. And AWS was really developed initially as a resource for Amazon, as I understand it. You know, Amazon had an incredible need for cloud services. And not only did they then build it themselves to support themselves, they thought they could commercialize it and have since turned it into a $50 billion organization. And Cate heads up the worldwide sales enablement, training, and communications functions. So they've got a massive sales organization, and the person who's really carrying the responsibility to make sure that they're all enabled to do their job and that there's really strong communication and training through the entire workforce around the globe is Cate Gutowski. And she does it with a real smile on her face. So Cate, where are you? I'm just looking for you on my screen.
You see me?
Now, Ian, can you change the view so that we can have Cate, you know, more prominent?
She's pinned, Paul. Yeah, yep. Both of you are.
There you go, to speak of you myself. Okay,
great.
So Cate, welcome along to today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Yeah. So what we want to do, Cate, is just really, you and I have a bit of a discussion first. I've got some questions I'd like to ask you, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A with the rest of the group. But everyone's got their cameras on, so you can see them, and there might, you know, be people reacting. We also have a chat. So if you guys have got questions, you know, we have a bit of a party that goes on the right-hand side of the screen with the chat. And so Greg and Ian, both of whom are black belts on the ID, tend to facilitate a lot of the chat, but I'll try and keep my eye on it. But I'll be obviously very engaged with Cate. But if you have questions, you can ask them there, and Ian and Greg and some of you can all chime in and answer them. But we will have room as we move through today for you to ask your questions directly of Cate as well. So if you'd like to do that, you know, please know that opportunity is coming up. So Cate, again, thank you for joining. When I think about leadership and authentic leadership, I know for myself, I never even saw myself as a leader for quite some time into my career, you know, and I'm really curious for you, given that you're still much younger than me. Have you always seen yourself as a leader, or is that something that's, you know, a certain inflection point in your career? When did you first really think of yourself?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Paul. You know, I really don't think of myself that way. You know, I think I have, as my career's grown, I've obviously, you know, had to consider myself that way. But I think even now, the way I lead, I really try to think of my team as a family, and I really try to think about it as like, we're in this together, and it's my job to really remove obstacles, but also to develop them and to help them achieve their dreams. And so I really don't think of it that way. Although more, you know, as you grow, right, and more people are asking for mentorship and sponsorship, you realize the gravity of that.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So what about in terms of your leadership journey. Maybe you could just share with the group a little bit about how did you get to where you are today? What has been just a quick synopsis so people have some sense of maybe what you've gone through and even some of your challenges.
Sure.
Along the way.
Oh yeah, there's many. We could write books about that. No, look, so let's see. So, I mean, I spent over 20 years at GE, and I worked in 5 different business units, you know, GE Energy, lighting, you know, I was in a startup inside GE that was designed to disrupt ourselves before someone else disrupted us in our power business. You know, I spent time at GE Digital and also at GE Corporate, and through all of that, right, I got a chance to experience a lot of different business cycles. And I also got a chance to experience different countries. So one of the big highlights for me was spending 3 years in Budapest, Hungary. And that was really a game-changing experience for me. You know, I remember when our CEO asked me to go there, and she made it really safe, right? She said, you know, you can go here. I really, you know, this is my first choice for you. I really want you to go and do this. But you know, I've also got this other idea for you. And so she made it really safe for me. People thought I was nuts. I went over to Budapest, Hungary with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. My daughter, Hannah, was 4, and my son, Matthew, was 2 at the time. And people thought I was crazy. You know, my in-laws thought I was nuts. And, but you know, that I've always been one for adventure, and lucky for me, you know, my husband's always been up for adventure too. And so that makes it really, that's made life really fun and interesting and enjoyable, because we're really a team. We really approach everything as a team. And, but that was really a game-changing experience for me, because I had to really learn very quickly a new culture. You know, I had people from Russia, people from France, people from Hungary, like South Africa, like all, it was really, my leadership team when I was over there was really very different. And I think that experience changed me a lot. I learned a lot about myself. You know, when you go to another country, your strengths are magnified, but your weaknesses are magnified too. And so one of the greatest gifts from that experience is you become very self-aware about what you're good at, but also what you're not good at. And I think that that really makes you a better leader, because when you really have that self-awareness, you can really build better teams. So.
Can you give an example of what you know, when you sort of say, well, your strengths were magnified, but so were your weaknesses, what was maybe a real learning from you where, you know, on both sides, not just the weaknesses, but
Sure. Yeah. So look, you know, I think it's no secret, you know, one of the greatest gifts that my dad, you know, Tom Munson, gave me is just, you know, my dad is probably the happiest and most positive person that I've ever met. And I get that from him. And so when I think about a strength being magnified, when I was over in Budapest, you know, remember, communism was still, communism only ended in 1997. So when I was there, communism had only been gone for, you know, 25 years. And in that 25 years, the country blossomed and became very democratic, but there's still undertones of the former regime. And so when I say my strengths were magnified, you know, the fact that I'm positive and optimistic, you know, but I was also very American when I went there. And so it was just screaming, you know, and little things that I didn't realize, but, you know, how loud I was, and, you know, how just charisma and things like that. I think I'm a little bit more subdued now, but back then it was really obvious. And so, but then also my weaknesses were magnified too, right? So with that positivity and optimism, and kind of just a real zest for life, like I want to go, and I want to do, but that comes at a cost. You know, it comes at a cost where you can appear ungrounded, and you can also appear to be chaotic and maybe disorganized. And so that's kind of what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And, you know, this is all about authenticity. So I knew you'd be honest about it. So do you still feel vulnerable to that? Like, when you know that you come across maybe as disorganized or chaotic, is that how you feel inside? I'm just curious for those people who've got a similar ID to you, and I'll show your ID in a minute. Is that how you still feel, or do you actually feel quite organized and, you know, in yourself?
I feel, you know, I think, I feel much more organized than I do today, and I feel less chaotic. In fact, I've recently had people say, "Oh, you seem very patient and very calm, regardless of the situation." So I think I've worked on that. But there's still the real me, right? And so there's still always going to be undertones of that, right? But I think what I've really appreciated about the ID is how it's really helped me to understand myself, right? I'm a 6'5" to 8, and and so with that 8, right, comes this incredible ease with improvise. And what I've really learned about myself is that that's not that makes some people comfortable, but it makes others uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, I'm actually showing your ID on the screen now, Cate, so that people can just have that picture in your mind. But there was a time when this was the first time you saw your ID, and I think a lot of people on the call will be really interested to know, because in your position and seniority, you've probably done a whole plethora of different assessment tools and so on, and yet there was something about the ID that grabbed you or connected with you. Could you maybe share with the group, your first experience with ID, like maybe what you first reacted to, and what was it about it that grabbed you?
Yeah, look, I'll be really honest with you, Paul, and this isn't going to surprise you. Look, when I first did, like when I when I first met you, and I was told, by my boss at the time that I needed to do this ID, gosh, I didn't take it seriously. I kind of blew it off. I think I even prevented, I even, delayed doing it for a while. I didn't get it. I did not get it. Why is this important? And I was lacking a bit of context about why it was important and why it was worth investing the time in, right? But then, but once I did it then, and I remember the session that you did, with my peers and I at the time, and it was really eye-opening, the things, just part of life is there's some people you really connect with and, pretty easily. And then there's others that you don't. And, and I think you can still connect with others, but you have to really approach it from a place of learning. And, as I really started to understand myself, and I started to understand why I am the way I am and why others are the way they are, it really helped me to appreciate my peers so much more. And I think it also helped them to understand me. And so, then you can really start to build, much higher quality relationships when you create that mutual understanding. And I think that's really what the ID did for me.
Well, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, I remember our first meeting. So just to give people some context, it was in October 2017. We were at an offsite with Cate's boss and all of her peers in a team retreat, really, over in Tokyo. And that was your first exposure to it.
Oh, no. I wasn't with the team then.
Okay.
So ours was October of 2018.
Oh, the following year. Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, I wasn't even invited to the meeting. So I was left off the invite. and I remember I was like pulled into the meeting at the very last minute, which I'm perfectly fine with because I'm improvised. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a relatively recent journey, but in that time we've done a lot together. So Cate has a fairly significant team and driving a lot of transformation. Maybe you can even talk about that a little bit, Cate, in terms of why have you now engaged ID, and what is it you're driving, and why to you, if you've got a transformation that you're driving, why is it so important to you to have something like the ID, as whether you see it as a tool or as a language? Be interested to maybe share that with the group so that we understand what's behind your passion for this.
Yeah, so I am very passionate about this. I really believe in the ID and in the methodology. I'm a huge believer in it. So let me give a little context about what I'm doing right now. So I was recruited to AWS to lead, sales enablement globally. And, really, when I think about what my team and I are doing, we're really at the center of the growth strategy for AWS. And this is really important, right? Because for the last, I would say 13 years, we've had like a certain type of customer in IT. It's been pretty, traditional and stable. But as with COVID, what's happening is like the market's changing and the customer's changing. So we're not just responsible now really for calling on IT. We really have to broaden, who we call on, and that means calling on the line of business and also the C-suite, and that requires a whole nother set of skills and capabilities. And so it's really a bit of a digital sales transformation in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of things that are changing, and we're leading that change. So as we are like transforming, one of the things that was really important to me was that I really needed to make sure that I had the best team possible leading this change inside AWS. And for me, that really meant understanding the full set of their skills and capabilities, and really being thoughtful about how I build the best team. And so I've really depended on the ID on kind of like two levels. I think one, it's really to understand myself, and to continue to increase that self-awareness, but it's also to really understand my team and to really understand how do we get the best out of each team member. And then, the other piece is that we have a lot of strategic partners that we have to work with, throughout the world. We call them our embedded enablement partners, and they're really a channel to market for us. And the relationship that we have with them is really important and special. And I've really used the ID to, again, kind of, build a better team through that mutual understanding.
Okay. Thank you. So one of the questions that's sort of connected to this that Grant has asked in the chat is how you manage ID diversity in your team, because there are a bunch of people who are different, and they're different in their experiences and ages and gender, but also in their mindset around ID. So be interesting just to hear your answer to that, the ID diversity that you do see. What goes through your head about that?
Yeah, great question, Grant. Thank you for that question. So look, I think in terms of the diversity, I think that, look, I would say that right now I'm probably too heavy on improvise, like generally in my Organization. But I think that that's also probably pretty common given like our topic, right? Sales enablement. But I think that what I've recognized is that the people that I've seen, great value from, have been the opposite of me, right? So I've got two that are very high on complete, and I find that I really value their perspective because it's quite different than mine. And I also have found that, I've got some that are high, so I think in terms of managing the diversity, I think what I haven't done yet is to have folks that I'm hiring now take ID, but I'm at a place where that is going to make a lot of sense. And so I think creating more balance amongst the team is really important. I think you can also, as I've really come to understand the IDs, when I'm seeing issues in the organization and we're drilling down into the ID, it's really clear. You can really start to make the connections.
Thanks, Cate. So I have a question for you about you. You always show up to me very on your game, in stride, and I'm sure there must be times when you maybe feel differently. But what do you do to keep yourself motivated and at your best? Do you have, whether it's a routine or certain thought processes, what do you go through in order to, really show up like this every day and be at your best? And what role does your ID play in that?
Yeah, great question. So for me, look, I think it's really about like always being cognizant of taking care of your mind, your body, and your soul, right? So I think for me, I know I'm at my best when I'm always wearing my Fitbit and, making sure that I'm getting, exercise and sleep and eating the right things and, like just doing those things to take care of yourself. I think it's also kind of knowing, like, I'm also a big proponent of like knowing where you need to be and when you need to be there. So I just recently sent a note to my organization on this. Last week I was having a terrible week. I had a lot of internet outages. I had my daughter, is in 4th grade. She was having meltdowns about long division. And, I was supposed to be on a review with my team. But you know what? Hannah, who never asks for help, right? Who's very proud and, it's hard for her to ask for help. She's like, Mom, I really need your help. Like, can you help me? And I'm like, you know what? I can. And I just said to the team, look, I gotta go do long division, with Hannah at the kitchen counter. And so that's what I did. And you know what? For that hour, I was so happy to be having hot cocoa with Hannah and doing long division. And although, I felt guilty because I felt, gosh, I really needed to be on that review. I really needed to be there for my team. Guess what? My team really understood. And I think they really appreciated that they knew that I needed to be where I needed to be. And I got some comments after. They said, Cate, you talk about balance, you talk about these things, but it's great to see you role modeling them, because now I know you really mean it. And so, it's just, I think, and for that hour, I was very present with Hannah. And then when I got back, I didn't have to worry about Hannah anymore, and I could really focus. And so I think that's important, to give yourself that freedom.
But it's great for you, but when you're in a leadership position, you do cast a shadow. And by you doing the right thing by you and Hannah, for that matter, and being your authentic self, as you said, it just automatically gave everyone else on your team permission to be true to themselves as well. You know what I mean? It's so important.
Yeah.
And so many of us can think, oh, we need to stay focused on work, but it doesn't actually provide the right dynamics. And yet we all bang on about wanting a healthy team and people to be true to themselves. But as leaders, especially, you're showing a great example there of when you actually do it, it liberates everyone else, it's a great example. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
So I can see some more questions coming up in the chat. I've got a few more here for you as well, but I might just flick over and let some of the people on the call ask their questions to Cate. And as I say, we've got some already in the chat, so I'll just call them out. Susan just said, did your team manage without you? And I think that's an interesting piece, not just in that one example, but with your ID, strong improvise, avoid complete person, you thrive on sort of what I call up and out, all that strategic play. But then there's the day-to-day management of the team. How do you manage that part? Because you do get a thrill out of being strategic, but you also recognize there is that day-to-day side. How's that work right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think, when I think about building leadership capability in myself, right? There's like the sales and the marketing and the strategic aspects that come really naturally to me that I really enjoy. But then there's also like the operational pieces that, I can do them. They're not my favorite, but they're really important, right? And so I think one of the things I've loved about the ID is knowing that I'm a 6'5", 2'8", right? I have such a low 2. One of the things I've learned is I've got to have these tips and tricks, right? And Paul, I think you've really helped me with a lot. You and Julianne really helped me with a lot of this, right? Which is, I know that I'm going to lose trust with my team if I say I'm going to do this and I don't do it. So I have to do little tricks, right? Which is, because I'm low on 2, if I say I'm going to do something, I've got to do it right while we're talking, right? Because if I don't do it right while we're talking, it may not happen. And it's not going to not happen because I don't care. It's just going to happen because I'm, just go, go, go. And I get my kicks from that 8, right? And improvise. And so, it's having those small practices to keep myself in stride.
But isn't it good to know that it's just who you are? There's nothing wrong. It's not like, it's not an area you've got to try and change about yourself. You just need strategies. And that's what we say, do it now or die, basically, and die in terms of your brand. But it's so true. You know that about yourself, and you hear the words come out of your mouth, leave it with me, or I'll do this for you. And you think, oh my God, I'm just setting myself up for failure right there. So you action it straight away and you're done.
Right, so, exactly. And I'll give you another example of this. So because I have an 8 in improvise, I know that like what I'm very comfortable with those last minute changes, those iterations, the flexing, but my team, a lot of my team isn't, and that's okay. Right. It's okay. But I think what I've learned is that if I can't be the beacon of predictability and stability and consistency, that's okay. But what a leader's responsibility is to build the best team possible. So I have an operations leader who is the beacon of predictability and consistency and stability. And he provides that for the team. And so I find that he and I work really well together because we have a lot of mutual respect and trust and understanding that, like, by him doing that, he frees me up to do what I'm better at. And everybody's happier as a result,
Right. And him being one of your two completers, right? That you.
Yes. Yes. Very high on complete. Thank goodness.
I can say from the outside looking in, you really have built a very effective relationship with him, but I should say Rob, to be kind to Rob. Yeah. But it's one built on a lot of mutual respect, because I think a lot of people ask, when you're so different to each other, how do you make that work? But the first thing I think is having an awareness of where you're different, but there's such a respect for that from him to you as well as from you to him,
Yeah. I feel really lucky. I feel really lucky about that. And I think as leaders, right, I think doing the basics, right, of showing genuine appreciation is so important to really helping keep your people, right, over time, because these are super talented folks. They've got a lot of choices, right? So showing our appreciation is so important.
Yeah, excellent. So with that, I might just stop coming from the chat and just see, is there anyone on the call that would like to ask a question directly of Cate? Just remember, if you're on mute, you might need to unmute yourself first.
I've got one. I've got a client almost identically with your ID, Cate. She just happens to be a 4528. And she has trouble sometimes when she's just brainstorming stuff and throwing things out, that some of the other people, that her beacons, take them as like, oh my God, we got to do that. And they run with stuff when she's just spitballing. And I wonder, do you ever get caught like throwing out a crazy idea and they think it's become an order?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? It's so funny. All the time. And you're right. And you really have to guard against that, right? So a lot of times I'll kind of preface something and I'll say, hey, it's up to you. Like, you make the decision, right? Because you're empowered to lead here. But let me give you a couple things that I'm thinking about, right? And so I find I have to go out of my way to really make that clear. And I also, I try to echo that with, like, look, if you ever need ideas, like, come to me, like, I've got plenty, right? But the choice is yours, and you need to form the point of view on what you're going to choose and why. So yeah, that's funny that she's got the same.
Yeah, and just to put the context on that, there's what Greg and Cate are referring to, for those of you on the call, is it's just, I think, the passion and the animation that when someone with a strong improvised drive is just shooting the breeze, it comes across like you've already made your mind up that you want that. And you say, it's so passionate that it's like urgent. And so therefore we need to sort of drop everything and respond. And when you're self-aware, that that's sort of the way people might be interpreting you. But when you don't know that that's how you come across, all your people are running around doing fire drills, spending the weekends, doing all this work and getting it to your Monday. And there's nothing worse than they bring the work to you and say, oh, there's what you asked for. And you're like, well, what is this? What is this all about? And they're like, I've just given up my weekend for something that you don't even care about anymore. But you may not even realize you were, you weren't making a request, but they thought you were. And that dynamic is true for a lot of improvisers. So for those of you who either are an improviser, it's good to be aware that that is how you can be perceived and people react to you. But if you're working with or for someone who's an improviser, it might be helpful for you, and they don't realize that, you could point some of that out, or at least know that's where they may be coming from. There's nothing malicious about it or reckless. It's just a difference in the way both of you might be wired. Great example. Good question, Greg. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else? Go.
Cool. Yep. Cate, I'm a 4229, so I'm even more of a strong improviser than you. And it always puzzled me why I just throw something out there and I get back, I can't do it now. And I never used the word now. And I realized then that people perceive that when I say something, it must be, it comes across as being urgent. My poor partner, who is a 2 on improvise, you know, I'll say something and he thinks it's happening and I've moved on over here and he's over here. And we often have these mismatches. So what we ended up doing, just to make life easy, was one weekend was mine, where we could do whatever else we wanted. And one weekend was his, which was carefully planned. But he wasn't to tell me the plan, because otherwise it didn't work for me. And it worked like a charm. And we've been together a very long time. But I find in the work environment too, what I just do is I come out with things, pass it on to somebody else, let them decide whether they like it or not, because I've got another idea germinating somewhere else. And my PA, who is a high complete, just takes them on. I was looking at some new software because something's not working as I know it should, but I don't know how. So I gave her half a dozen packages and said, here, have a look. And I imagine next week she'll come back to me and tell me which one is going to do what she wants it to do, which will ultimately work far better than anything I want to do, because I always forget the little bits here and there. I just look at the big picture and don't see the nuances underneath. So it's really interesting to hear you say exactly the same thing. And I really appreciate that, because sometimes it's helpful to be validated. And I'm sure other employers will feel the same.
Absolutely, Gail. I love your tips there. It's funny to find how we're all so similar. Yeah, it's a great system.
Okay, anyone else with a question?
Yes, I have a question for Cate. Hi, Cate. I'm a 7 in improvise, and I remembered when I first saw my ID report, first glance, I went, oh, that's why I say yes to everything. I never really got that about myself. And so I'm wondering, through your career, have you developed methods or like a system, like the trick of when you say yes and when you need to say no, and when you understand the difference and how you evaluate that?
Yeah, Pam, that's such a great question. And you're right, RID does struggle with that. One of the best things that ever happened to me in my career was, although I'd done a lot of sales and sales leadership, probably one of the best things that ever happened to me was learning product management. I got a chance to lead a couple of product management organizations. And I'm actually doing that now in my current job, because we do have a focus on technology as well. And the thing I love about product management is that great product managers really do two things every day. They solve today's problems, and they also look around corners and like they have to see the future. And what I also learned in product management is that if you don't learn how to say no, you'll never deliver anything on time. And so great product managers say no as much as they say yes. And so once I learned that, it became, I got much better at that, much faster. And I would say that I'm still not perfect at it, because I love ideas, I love to win, I love to build, I love to create. But that time that I invested in product management keeps me grounded in the fact that I can't do everything, and nor can my team. And so that's how I learned how to say no. So I highly recommend that to anybody trying to work through that. Great question.
Thanks, Cate. There's a very interesting question that Maker's asked in the chat around how do you see your ID fitting into the leadership expectations of the AWS culture? Because it is a fairly defined, I mean, the 14 leadership principles that AWS or Amazon has that are really embedded into the culture there. I mean, if someone wanted to go and work at AWS or Amazon today, you really need to learn these principles. How, for someone who needs flexibility and, you know, the freedom that your ID requires, how do you mentally reconcile all of that and still be a champion of the culture at AWS?
It's a great question. That's an excellent question. So you're right, Paul. The leadership principles are everything at AWS. There's 14 of them. And it's not something that we just talk about one day. You know, it's not a values card. We literally talk about these leadership principles every single day. And they're not just words. It's a value system, and it's also a way of making decisions. So I've never thought of this, but but as I probably just to maybe off the cuff here. Look, I think the 6 in verify is very much in our culture. Like, we're a data-driven culture. We value being right a lot. And part of that means like being very focused on the data. So I think the ID fits really well there. With the 8 on improvise, I think that really lends itself to our bias for action, our customer obsession. The 5 really, I think, in authenticate helps me deliver on, being right a lot, which is one of our values. It also helps me to have some backbone, right? We have backbone, disagree, and commit is really important for us. And a lot of people think I'm really nice, and I am. I'm really nice, but I also am like super driven, super competitive. And, I'm like, my husband describes it as like sweet and spicy, I've got a feisty side too. So it's really easy for me to say no, and it's easy for me to push back. Now, I'll do so in a nice way because I'm just a nice person, but sometimes people get confused about that. So I think it does lend itself actually pretty well to a lot of but I'd love to give that deeper thought, and I will actually.
But even stepping away from ID, and when you just think about you and the way you tick, do you feel like you're a good fit then with the cultural expectations that?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. It's funny. I feel like I fit really, really well here. I feel like, I love our culture. I mean, our culture is why I stay. We all get a ton of calls from recruiters and things like that. I stay because I really love the culture and I love the people. Right.
Well, and something you and I talked about just recently was the entrepreneur that's within you, because it really is like an entrepreneurial ID. Do you feel amidst all the, the normal constraints and requirements of a big organization where they've already got their predetermined vision and strategy and so on, do you still feel the ability to be able to be entrepreneurial? And do you even feel like an entrepreneur? In what
I do. It's funny. You and I have talked about this. And when I was first interviewing at AWS, I was really upfront with them that if it was up to me and I wasn't the breadwinner for my family, I would 100% be running my own business, like no question about it. And so I love being at AWS because it is a very entrepreneurial culture. And most days I feel like I'm working at a big startup that just happens to be, on track to do 56 billion this year, so and we did 46 billion last year. So, in the time I've been here, in the 2 years I've been here, we've gone from a $19.6 billion company to a $46 billion company, and we'll do 56 billion this year. So it's growing really fast, but it's very entrepreneurial. It's very startup-like. And so to me, it's like the best of both worlds. And I think, we are we are maturing also as a company too. And so that means more operational excellence, but it's the right thing for the right time.
Thanks, Cate. So we've heard from a few improvisers on the call. It'd be really interesting to hear from someone who's really quite opposite to you, around maybe what it's like to work with someone like you, or questions they might have if they've got a leader like you, that maybe they can sort of cheat a little bit and get your insight that might help them. Has anyone who is quite different to Cate got a question they'd like to ask?
Paul, I know I'm an improviser, but I've got like a transition question.
Okay.
I'm just wanting to. Hi, Cate. Susan here. I'm just wanting to ask you, how do you, with your improvise being so innate, and you can see strategically what to do, and then you've got your verify, which would be strong in terms of detail and getting things right, and then your down complete, which is to do with getting it done quickly. How do you marry that together when you're making decisions or moving forward with something?
I'm sorry, I apologize. You were breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes. How do you marry those two drives, like the verify and the improvise, with the down complete when you have to make a decision quickly, feeding into all those needs that you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So look, I think it's, with the verify drive, one of our leadership principles is dive deep. And so I think one of the things that sometimes surprises my team is they're expecting me to maybe fly at 100,000 feet, and they're not expecting me to want to get into the detail, but I really love getting into the detail. And so I think that's something that surprises people sometimes. But I find that dive deep and that verified drive really help you make good decisions. And I think the improvised drive means that I'm more prone to experimentation. And here at AWS, we believe that at Amazon, we believe that the best leaders are the ones that do the most experiments. Because when you're experimenting, you're learning. And when you're learning, you're making progress. So I think they actually complement each other pretty well, because it means I'm really open. I'm really open to experiments and trying new things. But I also make sure that I dive deep into the details and that we do our homework before we, and that we're strategic about our choices.
I might just add something to that, Susan. I heard someone explain it one time and it was an interesting twist, because in Cate's case, she's got her stronger drivers improvise, like it's an 8 in improvise and it's a 6 in verify. So that was like, I've already made my decision. Like my gut actually is like my compass, but my 6 in verify helps find the data that backs up that decision, you know, and if the data doesn't, then I know to maybe change direction. Whereas for someone like myself, my verify is a little bit stronger than my improvise. So I'm analyzing the data, but I'm doing it on the run. Like there's times where I'm literally changing the words that are coming out of my mouth because I'm thinking about them as they're coming out, and I'll go a different direction than what I was about to say, you know? So it's a subtle difference, but the two of them, no matter what your ID is, I mean, if you were an avoid verify and an improvise, if you were true to that combination, then that would work for you in your decision making in terms of being very gut feel, as you would be if you're trusting your sense of knowing. But yeah, I think it's they do work together, but it's probably more. And Cate, you're willing to you know, elaborate on this if you wish, but it's more that the decision of what to do, you already have a gut feel around it, but then you're looking for data.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah, I think you're explaining it much better than I was. Yeah, that's a good way to explain it.
So getting the data to back what your decision is, basically, but to be conscious of that. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Cate. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. These are Paul, I'm really impressed with the caliber of the questions. These are great.
This is our masterclass group. They're very
I can't wait to attend the next one. I'm learning. Yeah. I'm really enjoying this because I'm actually learning more, I think, from the audience. These are great. Thank you. I love the questions.
Thanks. Yeah. So is there someone who has a very different ID to Cate that would like to talk about how you can work with someone like Cate?
Don't be shy. Don't be shy. I need all the help I can get.
Well, I would love, my ID is 7553. And I think my boss, she's a similar ID to you. Okay. So I would love, like, do you have members on your team with a similar ID? And like, what's good about working with them, or what's difficult?
So yeah, so Jennifer, your ID 7553. I do have IDs that are similar to this. In fact, one of the IDs it's actually, I'm thinking of someone in particular who's a skip level to me. And I find I reach out to her oftentimes to kind of get a pulse of the organization, but also for her to help me like look around corners and to just get like a different perspective about what's working or what's not working. And I'll give you a good example. One of the things that she said to me was, and you Paul, you know who I'm talking about, Octavia, actually.
Right.
And one of the things that she said to me, and she was right on the money, was she said, Cate, she said, what I'm noticing about your organization is that there's so much focus on innovation that and she goes, you tell me that operational excellence is important to you, but I don't hear you articulating it, and it's not apparent in your organization. And so as soon as she told me this, it was like a light bulb flashed, and I very quickly pivoted. And from that moment on, I intentionally messaged in my organization that there were two things that were important, that we needed to continue to innovate, but then we also needed to have an equal focus on operational excellence. And this was incredibly important because I think that they are both important, and it's really helped us to deliver a lot more results faster by having, because when you've got the right mechanisms and the right data and inspection, you can really, you know, deliver results in our culture quickly. So that was really helpful to me. So I wouldn't underestimate the value you can bring.
It's really great that you share that, Cate, because, you know, with you think about your natural default, you can come across like you're always up and out and doing all the strategic things, and that therefore the operational excellence side isn't as important to you. And yet in lots of ways, unless that is all buttoned up, you're not free to go and be at your best on those strategic issues. So there is, I think it takes a lot of self-security on the part of the 7553 type people to know how valuable their work is to you. And even just their questions they can ask that sort of make you sort of think twice about, and when you think twice and you're still solid, it gives you even more confidence, you know, which is what you need as the oxygen.
Exactly. I think the key is, like, no matter what ID you are, I think you've got to recognize that there's great ideas everywhere, and there's things that you can learn. And so I think just taking the time to ask people is just really important, no matter what your ID, you know. And
then, and the flip side, I'm sure Jennifer is a verified sitting there saying, now you got to answer the main part of my question, which is, where do we drive you frigging nuts? You know? Yeah, you know, look, I think this is probably not going to go, this isn't probably going to be a big surprise, right? But I think, look, I think being an improvise, I love to experiment. I love to try new things. And so I think probably where, like, I might butt heads with a high verify like that is when, is kind of two areas, right? Like, to me, the world is gray, right? And anything is possible. Anything and everything is possible, right? And then to the high verify, right? The world is black and white and everything needs to fit into a box. And like, I don't operate in a box. I mean, like, forget about the box. Like, I want to stand on the box. Like, I want to throw the box away. So I think it's just, you know, that rigidity, I think at times is probably where we butt heads, but I have great respect for those that are high and verify, because I always feel like I have a lot to learn. So when you think, though, about people you work with really well that are somewhat like Jennifer, and I think of someone like Rob, you know, what is it about the way, how is it that he can bring you things that if there's someone else that might be a wet blanket, or you'd think it was negative and they were stuck and fixed, but he's able to do it in a way that somehow gets your attention. That's what everyone wants to know, is how can I not be that wet blanket but still be true to myself and raise those sorts of risks or concerns? So what does he do? Yeah. Look, I think Rob's probably a special exception, because I think he knows how to manage me really well. But no, look, here's what I think he does that I think gets my attention. So I think, in fact, he was doing this just yesterday. Because I have a 6 in verify, I care about data, and like, data matters. So when he brings me a valuable piece of data or a great insight, like, I'm intrigued, right? I'm intrigued. But I think also he'll couch it in a way where it's about, like, he'll tie it to strategy. And then again, I'm intrigued, like, oh. But then also, look, the other thing I would tell you too is, don't be afraid with my ID to beat me over the head and to say, Cate, I disagree, and here's why. Because I'll snap out of it really quickly, because, you know, and I'll pay attention, right? So don't be afraid to do that. The folks with my ID aren't going to take it personally, honestly. In fact, we're going to be grateful that you're bringing it to our attention.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm on the phone because I'm having internet issues.
Okay.
I'm coaching a leader. This is Ilona.
Hi, Ilona.
Hi.
Good to hear from you.
Yeah, it's nice. I'm so excited that you're on here. I'm just really honored that you joined us today.
Yeah.
So I'm coaching a leader who's got a similar but not exactly the same ID as you, 4, 5, 2, 8, and she wants some coaching from me about how does she encourage people to feel brave to do that. And I know that you've done a lot of work on this, and so I'm wondering if you have any strategies that you're like, oh, I need to remember to ask for it, or I need to remember to whatever. So I'm curious what your strategy is to make them feel safer so that I can encourage my leaders in that way.
Oh, Ilana. Yeah, this is a great question. Well, look, one of my my why is I have the courage to go first, and then I make it safe for others to follow. So like I learned that about myself a few years ago. And once I learned that about myself, and I kind of learned that that's like a bit of a superpower about like making it safe. I kind of have gone out of my way to do that. And so one of the things I think is most important, I think there's like two things that leaders have to really do, right? They have to, number one, they always have to remove obstacles for their team. But one of the second most important things that they can do is they have to make it safe for their teams to tell the truth. And then they have to make it safe for their teams to fail. And when you do that, that's how I think you really innovate and deliver results on a consistent basis. My team hears me say this a lot, and we talk about this a lot in Amazon. Our job is to become truth tellers, because, you know, where companies fail is when they're not telling the truth about what's going on. And so whenever I see someone escalating or telling the truth, like when it's hard to tell, I always go out of my way to like stop and thank them. And I try to thank them in a public way. And I'll say, look, I know it's hard to escalate, but, you know, here at Amazon, escalation is good. Keep escalating, you know, or if someone tells the truth, you know, and it's something that everybody knows, but no one's saying, I'll go out of my way to say, you know, thanks for having the courage, you know, to speak up and let us know where we're, you know, missing this, or, you know, what have you, whatever it is, right? But just, you gotta publicly, like, I just found as a leader early on, like, if there's something you want, you've got to make it really clear that that's what you want. And so I try to be really transparent, you know, and thankful when folks speak up like that. And that's how you can create an environment where it's safe to tell the truth and safe to fail, right? Because if you're not failing, you're probably not taking big enough swings, you know?
That's a fantastic answer. I mean, that is gold on this call that will help so many people, you know, both those here, but many people listen to this afterwards. And I know there's a few that couldn't dial in. That's a great leadership response.
Sorry, Paul and Cate, can I just share something as well on this? So obviously I'm quite the opposite there. So one for avoiding improvise. And one thing that I was thinking just on Ilana's question is that for the improvisers, you have ideas on the go and you're talking through them, and that's all very exciting. But maybe for someone with my profile, maybe give us some time in an agenda and then book a meeting, and that will encourage us to bring our feedback later on, because we can't really think on our feet. So something like, okay, this is my idea, and I'd like to know what you think about, and then book a meeting for another time so we can actually prepare and come back with what our positives and negatives, and that could encouraging.
Yes, yes. Amanda, you're exactly right. You know, with your ID, wow, I don't think I've ever met anybody that's a 1 on improvise, but that's really, you've got a cool ID actually. So you're exactly right. I do have some folks on my staff that they really don't want to brainstorm with me. They really want to take the time to think about it. And I've learned over time just to say to them, hey, here's something I want you to think about. Can you give this some thought, and can we get back together? And you can kind of noticeably see them relax, and so that's stuck with me. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's not lost on me at all, and it's a great call out.
Just on the flip side of that, really quick. So I'm Sarah 6672. On the flip side, you have to learn to like ask, can I take some time to think about that? Because it's not going to always be volunteered. And so that's where it's kind of like meeting in the middle on that partnership. And then, you know, Cate or someone with Cate's ID, like saying yes to that instead of trying to force it on the spot.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sarah. You're right. Advocating for yourself is always knowing what you need and not being shy to say that is so important. I agree.
Okay.
Cate, have you ever found, I'm thinking of my client that has your ID. she sometimes they say to her, you can't possibly understand this. You haven't gone deep enough. You because her too, and she moves off quickly and she comes up with solutions really quickly. And they sometimes feel that she's not getting it because they're down in the weeds. And sometimes it doesn't look she's interested because she goes, oh, well, you'll fix that. She's like almost not flippant, but can appear that way. Do you ever get like you're too surface because it just isn't a problem for you? You see it solved, something like.
Yeah, no, Greg, you're exactly right. I've dealt with that before in my career. And I would say that that's an ongoing challenge. I think what I love about working at Amazon is that there's a way to solve that. And it's called the narrative, right? So all business is done here through like 2-page or 6-page narratives. And so what I've learned is a couple things. One, I have to be really thoughtful in my language, and I've had to become more precise in my language. And that's one way to kind of get away from, to help project a different image, right? But then the second thing is that because we do business with these narratives, and I love to write, what I do is I try to demonstrate the depth and the dive deep and how much I care about the topic by the quality of the narrative. And so that's a way that I have to kind of showcase how I can dive deep and how I'm not flippant. But you're right, that is probably the number one thing I've had to guard against. And it's a battle for me every single day because it's a classic perception, right? Yeah.
I mean, this is just awesome sharing, Cate, and again, the authenticity of it. But I love the way you're sort of acknowledging that it's not something you can fix it when it's part of your ID. It's just about each and every day. So, guys, we're sort of right near the top of the hour, and out of respect for all of you and you too, Cate, we really appreciate you giving up the hour. This has been a really fun conversation. I know the questions that have been covered here, people have actually had on their minds for some time and have been really looking forward to this interview so that they could get a better sense, not just of you, but when they're working with people like you, because there are a lot of leaders with that sort of really entrepreneurial ID. That's why they're where they are. But working with them is another story, and this has been so helpful today to many people. So, Cate, thank you for giving up your time. We will send you the recording so you can also use it from here. And to the rest of you, it's always great to have you on the call. And we look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.